Claire, are we already in a political crisis?
Well, we are, but we're in a political crisis. But just on the whether we blame politicians, I think to go back before Brexit and partly to explain what happened in that referendum, I think we actually have to go back to a phrase that was coined by Margaret Thatcher, which was Tina, there is no alternative. Francis Fukuyama said the end of history. And that was very much this idea that there is no, this is it, right? And politicians, we entered what was then described as a post-ideological period. And what you got was that this ripped the heart out of and the soul out of principled political parties that stood for anything. And you got the emergence of kind of managerial, utilitarian politicians who tinkered around, but basically thought that the big stuff didn't need to be interfered with. And I think that as a consequence of that, we're all aware of the way that things have happened. There is a political class. They speak the same language. They feel very comfortable with each other. They know each other. It's not a kind of they went to the same schools point. It's more that it's a kind of way of being. And it doesn't have any of the spirit and the dynamism that politics used to have, which was the fight for the contestation of the future. So basically, if you then look, what happens is they become more comfortable talking to each other than they do talking to the electorate. I mean, one of the things that was hilarious after Brexit was all these politicians who said, I don't recognise the country I lived in, right? And, who was expecting that? And you do think, well, get out more. I mean, they were your constituents who voted. It's not my fault you never talked to them. It was a shock to the elite, but that is actually because they had no feel for what the mood of the country was. So in that sense, I think there's a political crisis around politicians, not because they're horrible people, but because they're not people of principle and honour who stand for ideological difference. That's one of the things I'm concerned about. The number of times that people will say to me, this sovereignty stuff, what's all that about? I don't understand it. Because one of the things that happened as a consequence of technocracy was that all that politicians did was that they basically did to people. They kind of paternalistically intervened in people's lives rather than seeing them as equals and citizens who they treated with respect. And as a consequence of which, people had their agency removed from them. They no longer felt that they had any purpose. I mean, people think that the Brexit vote had something to do with being left behind in the economy and the financial crisis. That's only a small aspect of it. The reason why that slogan, take back control, resonated with people was because they felt that they had no control over their future. And the whole fight for democratic rights, for the suffragettes and the Chartists, all these people, was about saying we take control of our destiny, we are taken seriously. And they felt that had been squeezed out for decades. So then they actually thought, right, I'm going to say what I want to happen in the future. And as a consequence, I think the politicians don't actually know, because they're technocrats who have had a very narrow political experience. They don't actually know how to lead or interact with people in those circumstances. So in that sense, I think that the political elite have been shown up. I think it was Dan Hannan yesterday said, we have many pygmies in politics, and many of us will recognise that. It also relates to the EU, final point on this one, which is that part of the problem about being in the European Union, which makes me laugh, is the idea that it's kind of like 28 countries harmoniously fighting for peace and prosperity, and we all sit around holding hands. This is a massive trade bloc. It's about exploiting as much as possible ways of making money out of millions of people throughout Europe. I mean, talk to the Greek people if you want to know what it feels like being in a Eurozone country. This is fortress Europe that actually accrues upon itself a huge amount of power. Now, this is where you might be surprised. I don't blame the bureaucrats in Brussels for the growth of EU power. It is a deal done by the ruling classes of each and every one of those countries to remove decision-making from their domestic electorates and to take it somewhere else. If you look at most EU laws, they were suggested by British politicians. But what British politicians did was, rather than taking it to us, where they might have to have a row, they took it to Brussels, got it past there, came back to us and said, we've got no choice, it's the EU's fault. So I do understand that the EU stuff has been an alibi, but every single ruling class in every European country thinks that. By the way, I was influenced quite heavily by some of the Green Eurosceptics who used to argue this sort of stuff not that long ago and actually made an impact on me. I was influenced by Tony Benn saying it. That's why it's anti-democratic. But as a consequence of that, institutions in this country have lost the ability to deal with politics. So the NFU, just one example, I was talking to them before the referendum, and they said, and it was a joke, oh, if we do leave, we won't know what to do. Because our policy department is made up of lawyers who spend their whole time in Brussels interpreting the law. We actually haven't got an agricultural policy. And every single institution was like that. They related to policy making by going and discussing it somewhere else, not with us. Now, I happen to think we're more important than them. And that is not because I'm a nationalist or a nativist, it's because I'm a Democrat. And the way democracy happens is in the nation state where your vote matters.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.